My mom wants us to split if you can't give her a grandchild. Alright, sure, but I'm pregnant though. Huh? I'm Anna, a housewife in her 30s. I live with my husband, a salaried employee. I met my husband when I was working at a food-related company. I fell for his occasional charming smile during our many business discussions, so I asked him out myself. When I asked him out, he said, "Sorry, I'm happy, but I have a girlfriend," and rejected me. But 1 month later, he asked me out saying, "I broke up with her. Can we start dating?" Apparently, he became conscious of me since I confessed to him, and his girlfriend, sensing something odd about his behavior, asked, "Are you into someone else?" When he nodded, she suggested they break up, and he agreed to end their relationship. I heard about it and felt guilty for ruining their relationship, but he told me, "It wouldn't have lasted anyway, don't worry," with a smile. I was saved by him, and after dating for 3 years, we got married. At that time, he told me, "I want to have children after we get married. Could you be a housewife to support me and our children?" At that time, I was working at an exploitative company and didn't want to continue working there. So, as my husband suggested, I quit my job and chose to become a stay-at-home wife. I decided to support my husband. The transition from working as an employee to becoming a full-time housewife was surprisingly difficult and a continuous series of confusion, but that I didn't let bother me. Because our newlywed life was smooth sailing and I was always at the peak of happiness. Every day was fun and filled with joy. And not having any in-law issues was a big deal for me. My husband's parents' home is a 10-minute walk from our apartment. When I found out, I thought they might frequently visit and give me a hard time, but that fear was unfounded. My in-laws were very kind people, and they would come all the way to our house to teach me patiently and kindly even when I just had a little question. They never complained to me for not being able to conceive a child soon, and even said, "I love you more than any grandchild. I've always wanted a daughter because there are only men in our house except for me. Please let me love you like a real daughter from now on." I loved my mother-in-law for that, and I trusted my father-in-law, who was a man of few words but very reliable. But such warm treatment only lasted for the first few years. As years passed, the attitude of my in-laws changed little by little. My father-in-law became even quieter, and my mother-in-law had changed so much that I doubted if she had a double personality. No, this might be the real mother-in-law. To give you an idea of how much she changed, would it be easy to understand if I said she went from plus 100 to minus 100? At this point, my mother-in-law had become rather tough on me. Because we live nearby, she frequently pops by our house, and when my husband isn't around, she nags at me. Over and over, she pressures me to have a child soon, saying, "I want to see my grandchild already, and that's your duty as a wife." Not too long ago, she was telling me that children are gifts from heaven, and that they come naturally when the time is right, so there's no need to rush. Moreover, my mother-in-law compares us to other families, saying, "I heard the family next door just had a baby, and the lady next door is pregnant too." This has added even more pressure on me. However, no matter how much my mother-in-law pushes me to have a child, it doesn't matter if my husband isn't on board. At the beginning of our marriage, my husband did say he wanted kids, but about a year after we got married, he seemed to lose interest altogether. Even when I tried to initiate, he would turn me away, saying, "I'm tired, let's do it some other day," or, "You're bothering me, I'm trying to play my game." Even when I explain this to my mother-in-law, she doesn't seem to understand or empathize, and she continues to pressure me about having a child, causing my stress level to build up day by day. Feeling overwhelmed by my mother-in-law's constant nagging, I confided in my husband about how hard it's been getting pressured to have kids. Then, my husband, although a bit begrudgingly, said, "I don't see the need to rush, but I agreed to make more effort to have a child together." So we both put in the effort, but no matter how long we waited, I never became pregnant. Even throughout this time, my mother-in-law kept accusing me of not putting in enough effort, and even went as far as to spare my husband from any blame. I even started to suspect that the stress from my mother-in-law was affecting my ability to conceive. Unable to withstand the pressure from my mother-in-law anymore, my husband and I finally decided to seek fertility treatments. Just when I thought I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, a new problem arose concerning my husband. Ever since we started fertility treatments, he's been acting cold towards me. He'd come home from work and immediately go into his room to play video games, often ignoring me when I try to talk to him. That alone would have been bearable, but things took a turn for the worse when he started getting angry about me for spending a little money on sewing materials, my hobby. On stressful days from work, he'd take out his frustration out on me. Whenever I tried to argue back, he'd quickly lose his temper and lash out at me, repeating over and over again, Who do you think is providing for you? You're just a freeloader," and continued to behave selfishly. Even when I remind him that I only quit my job because you wanted me to, he doesn't seem to listen. One day, amidst all the ongoing chaos, my husband, who should have been off to work, was at home playing video games. When I asked, "Aren't you going to work?" he responded, "I quit." Apparently, my husband quit his job without even discussing it with me. Shocked, I asked him why he quit, then he snapped, saying, "Get out of my business," and got angry. Frustrated by his uncooperative attitude, I couldn't help but accept the fact that what's done was done. I wasn't panicking about our finances, as I thought we could live off of unemployment benefits and our savings. However, it became stressful when I noticed that my husband wasn't interested in finding another job. With his job gone, my husband started staying home all day. I wished he would go out more, but his hobby was gaming. Aside from the occasional trip to the nearby convenience store for cigarettes, he was all day at home playing his video games. Compared to when he was employed, the time we spent together dramatically increased. If this was back in the days when we had first started dating, I might have perceived this as a good thing, having more time for intimacy, but not anymore. The amount of time spent together with my husband, who, like my mother-in-law, went from being a plus 100 to a minus 100, only meant more marital disputes. Gradually, we realized that even just talking to each other was becoming stressful, leading to less and less conversation. I began to wonder, what's the point of continuing this marriage? I started feeling the limits of our current lifestyle and started thinking about ways to break free from it. One day, fed up with my husband wasting his time gaming at home, I finally lost my patience and snapped, "You're not a child, stop playing games all the time, find a job already." In response, my husband said, "Speaking of which, my mom told me to divorce you if you can't give her a grandchild." At that moment, I felt grateful to my mother-in-law. Who would have thought she'd assist me in this way? Ironically, I was pregnant at that time. I had confirmed it with a test earlier that day and was planning to break the news that night. But I guess it was right not to do so. This way, I could distance myself from both my mother-in-law and husband. I responded, "All right, got it. Here's the divorce papers," and I pulled out the already filled divorce papers from my drawer and handed them to him. My husband, who was not expecting me to agree to a divorce, let alone pull out filled divorce papers, froze in surprise when he saw them and blurted, "What?" His usual condescending attitude was nowhere to be found. He was completely dumbfounded. While he seemed to want to say something, he was so convinced that he must follow his mom's advice that he signed the divorce papers without much hesitation. During all this, he kept glancing at me to gauge my reaction. After filling out the divorce papers, we agreed to meet later to discuss matters like asset division. However, we had barely any assets to worry about. My husband, in fact, was known for spending a lot on his hobbies. Apart from gaming at home, he seemed to have poured quite a bit of money into gaming arcades. He used to complain about my spending habits, but in reality, he was the one who was reckless with money. The concept of saving was alien to him. My husband, who hadn't saved a penny since his bachelor days, continued this habit after marriage. Consequently, we had accumulated no savings or assets during our marriage. Realizing that we had no property to divide, I thought that our discussions were over. However, my husband insisted that we weren't done yet and pointed out a certain bank book saying, "We still have our savings, right?" Indeed, that account had a substantial amount of savings, and my husband suggested that we divide it. But that savings account was not subject to property division. "This is the money I saved before we got married, so it doesn't count in the property division," I explained. My husband's face grew rapidly pale upon hearing this. Even so, he blurted out, "Oh right, this condo should be subject to property division, right? After all, I lived here too." With a cruel smile, I laid out the harsh truth. "Unfortunately, the condo is under my name, so you have no right to it. Besides, I've already put it up for sale, so you can't live here anymore. You should move out as soon as possible to avoid any inconvenience," I told him. I had been saving up for a larger home in the future, predicting that the condo would become too small. Before marrying my husband, I enjoyed saving money, and even as a salaried employee, I had managed to accumulate a significant amount of savings. With those savings, I had even bought this condo during my single years, so I did have some wealth to my name. With the funds from selling the condo, I could even build a decent house downtown. Of course, all those assets belonged to my pre-marriage life and were not subject to this property division. My husband seemed unaware of this, though. He must have thought he would get half my assets, but how unfortunate for him. Upon learning that he wouldn't be part of the property division, my husband was in a state of shock. We continued to talk, but he couldn't shake off his daze. As there was nothing more to discuss, the conversation ended quickly. We then submitted the divorce papers to the authorities. Our divorce was finalized without any trouble. A few months later, I moved back to my parents' house and, with their support, safely gave birth to a baby. It was a healthy baby boy. I named him Richard, a strong name with ambition. Now, I'm spending every day fulfilling my life with my beloved child and parents. Of course I haven't told my ex-husband. I'm sure if he found out, my former mother-in-law would storm in demanding, "Give me my grandchild." Meanwhile, after being ousted from the condo, my ex-husband returned to his parents' home. However, he was apparently so shocked by how quickly they accepted our divorce that he became turned into a social recluse. I've heard that even when he rarely goes out, his appearance is so suspicious that he's frequently stopped and questioned by the police. How pitiful he is. I heard later on that the reason my ex-husband quit his job was due to strained relationships at work. Apparently, he was even rude at work and especially disliked by female colleagues. He eventually got ignored by everyone. Unable to bear such a situation, he abruptly quit his job one day. Perhaps he's always been this way. He only acted kind in front of me. What a wolf in sheep's clothing. 3 years later, I'm now working as the manager of a craft store. When I became a regular at a local craft store, the owner approached me. "I'm getting old and thinking about retiring. If you're okay with it, could you take over the store, Anna?" she proposed. At that time, my parents were very supportive with childcare, so I had a lot of free time. I was considering getting a job again. And if I declined, this store would disappear. That would be inconvenient for many regular customers. So, with these thoughts, I decided to take over the store. Today, as I was serving occasional regular customers, a pair of unexpected guests paid me a visit. Yes, those unexpected guests were none other than my former mother-in-law and ex-husband. "Well, this is quite a nice shop for you, isn't it?" "Sure, Mom. Look, this fabric seems like it would suit you." Fed up with their transparent flattery, I asked, "So, what brings you here?" Then my former mother-in-law comes out with something unintelligible. "Give me my grandchild back." Apparently, she had somehow learned that I had given birth and was intending to make my child the heir to their family home. "When I brought up divorce, you were already pregnant. Why did you keep quiet? If I'd known, I wouldn't have divorced you." My ex-husband started accusing me. Obviously, I wanted the divorce. If you knew I was pregnant, you would have done anything to prevent the divorce. I shot back at my ex-husband and former mother-in-law. Then, my former mother-in-law starts talking nonsense again. "So, are you going to give me my grandchild back or not? I want to live with my grandchild as soon as possible. You've had your time with him. You've been with him for 3 years, now give him to me." Just as I was flabbergasted, my parents and my son Richard appeared and asked, "What's going on? Is there a problem?" It seems they had been alerted by a regular customer and came rushing over. Then, seeing Richard holding hands with my parents, my former mother-in-law exclaims, "Oh, how adorable! He looks just like my son when he was a child. Look, I'm your grandma." She tried to approach Richard. I tried to stop her, but it turned out I didn't have to. Richard proclaimed, "I only have one grandma," and clung to my mother. "So, given the circumstances, perhaps it's best you leave," my mother suggested to my former mother-in-law. "Never mind that, just hand over the kid to my mom." My ex-husband tried to forcefully snatch Richard away from my parents. I stepped in front of my ex-husband to protect Richard, but being much less physically imposing, I was easily brushed aside. "Richard, watch out!" There were just a few inches left before my ex-husband could grab Richard's arm. But then, my ex-husband flew in the air. What? Looking up, there was my father having just executed a perfect over-the-shoulder throw. Yes, my father had thrown my ex-husband at the very last moment. Turns out my father was a police officer and his judo skills were so good that he had competed in national championships in his student days. My ex-husband, who knew nothing of this, was unable to utter a word from the pain and could only look at my father with a pitiful expression. "Well then, if you plan on causing any more trouble for my children or grandchild, we may have to involve the authorities. What will it be?" My father asked, showing his police badge to my former mother-in-law. Seeing this, my former mother-in-law, her face pale, grabbed my ex-husband's hand and fled. Since then, I've had no idea what became of my former mother-in-law and ex-husband. Not that I want to know, of course. A few years later, inspired by my father, Richard started aiming to become a police officer himself. "When I grow up, I'm gonna be a cop too, and I'll protect you as well," he'd say, and is now focusing hard on his studies to become a police officer. Nowadays, he's practicing judo under my father's guidance, and I hear he's unmatched among his peers. As for me, I will continue watching over my beloved son as he grows.